Okay. So where do we start? Start at the beginning, I suppose. You'll probably know my name's Stuart. I seem to have been doing this for a long time, but I always enjoy it. Going back over what got me interested in Jung was it was so ordinary. I was years ago when everything was completely up in the air for me. I was trying to sort my life out, and a friend of mine suggested I go to lectures that were being given on Jung. And I went along, and it was just so ordinary. It was so, this makes sense, and I wasn't very particularly clever about anything to do with these matters, but it made sense to me from the very beginning. And I wanted then to get more and more and more. So I just started reading books and then attended a course, and it just developed. The path opened up for me, and as I walked down further on it, I just followed it. And I've been doing that for 30 odd years. So hopefully it'll make as much sense to you as well. And you'll find it easy as I did, I suppose. Now the theory, it's not easy. It's so deep, and it's really difficult to understand sometimes if you're just reading the books. So what generally is said is, if you want to read Jung, his work, read something that was written about it. Because if you go directly to his complete works, it's like trying to read the Bible backwards. It's so difficult and so deep. But if you read some of the commentaries on Jung, like there's a great book called Jung for Idiots, and believe it or not, that's the type of book that breaks it right down into really easy to understand language. And so Jung for Dummies, there was another book years ago called Jung for Dummies, and again, it was one of the most popular books because it gave all of the concepts in really simple language. And then once you get your head around the basic shape of it, once you get your head around what it's all about, then dive into the deeper stuff, or, attempt to read the deeper stuff. I still would find it very difficult. But a lot of this sort of study is something that you got to do yourself. The likes of me, I'll come on and I'll talk about it, or you'll hear things spoken about it as you go along. But really, it's what you do during the week. Google it, go on Facebook. You learn a lot about Jung from the memes and some of the Jungian groups. So basic psychology, what you need is a basic understanding first. And then out of that basic understanding, other things will grow. So that's it. So Jung would be classed as depth psychology. And you've got different areas of psychology. You'd have developmental psychology, educational programs would be based on developmental work. But depth psychology is more looking into ourselves. What am I? What is this? What is life? It's more the philosophical end. And it deals with the mysterious. It doesn't deal with it, but it explores the mysterious, if you like. So it's quite spiritual. It has space in it for spirituality. Whereas a lot of other psychology is very right brain. It's very, rational, logical. It doesn't really include space for the mysterious or the divine or the beloved or any of those words you want to put in. So Jung's work, it can be summarized as he said it himself. He said this work is about approaching the sacred. So as soon as we leave, our familiar surroundings behind and look inside, as soon as we start going in underneath our skin, we're approaching the sacred within ourselves. So, guys, is my English okay? Do you understand? Do you need me to talk slower? Or you're all thumbs up. That's great. Well, listen, if there's any words or phrases that you get stuck on, wave or stick your hands in the air or do something, jump up and down or something. I don't mind. I can go over this stuff as often as you want. Okay, it's not a problem. Okay, so this approaching the sacred, life is sacred. So as soon as we start looking inside, we're looking at how life is enlivening us. You see, we're starting to see this is how I function, how I work. So the psyche, who am I? Well, I'm a leaf on a tree. The tree is the psyche, and I'm an identity, and you're an identity, and the next person is an identity. But the psyche is common to us all, life itself. So the same aliveness is running through me as is running through the tree. I walk through a forest, same aliveness in the forest as there is in me, but just I'm more separated. I stand alone. To say I'm a person, I'm an individual, I'm a man. So this individuality separates me from aliveness. It separates me from the beloved, from God, from spirituality. And then I have to form a religion in order to have a relationship with the God. And yet the God is inside me. You see, the God as the psyche is inside of me. So when I started hearing this, it made sense to me. It's like, yeah, I want to know more about this. So I started diving into the books. The first book I read about Jung was Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. That's his autobiography. So if anybody wants to read a book, that's usually the first one that's recommended that would be written about Jung, apart from the Jung for Dummies, Jung for Idiots, which are bestsellers. But it is worthwhile reading that. It's actually an interesting book to read as well. You can get a PDF file online. It's downloadable, which is useful. So anyway, Jung said, okay, we are the psyche. At the end of his life, he said, I know all about the psyche, but I've no idea what it is. After all his years of study and writing down and, him being the master that he was on it, he says, I can tell you everything about its dynamics and what it does and all of that and what needs to be sort of known about it. But don't ask me what it is because I haven't a clue. And I was very honest. This idea of the mysterious coming through, it was wonderful that he was able to say that he didn't know what it was. And he said the body itself is just another form of consciousness. So he sort of broke things down, used the okay. So we have the ability through our work. Why do we do this work? Because it affects our life and it affects the life of and I always get mixed up in this, our ancestors and our descendants. Within the psyche, inside of us, we're reaching into a timeless space. You see, so past and future exist inside of us. So as we bring awareness to ourselves, we are literally healing the past and healing the future. And Jung said that as we approach this work of self-awareness, as we approach the beloved within ourselves, as we approach our own soul, all of our problems start falling away. So we release ourselves, we heal ourselves. And yet it's not a healing, it's more a growing beyond. We evolve. Do you see? So this is the potential that is available to us. Now, he called all of this, he termed all of this the path of individuation. Becoming an individual. Individuation. Becoming the individual that you are. Becoming the individual that you are meant to be. Not the individual that your family would name you as, but the authentic self, the real self, who you actually are. And this process of individuation is getting to know yourself and getting to know, I suppose, the maps that he has left behind, these maps that apply to all of us. You see, we can use the maps as we explore ourselves. So they're very useful. As I sort of went through my own sort of the issues that I needed to look at back then, and God knows there's been issues all along, but the issues I needed to look at back then, I was able to reference myself through reading Jung. I was able to see, well, this is what this is. This is how it works. So for me, that was important. It was sort of book in one hand, life in the other. You see, it gave me a point of view through which I could begin to understand what was going on, why things were the way they were. So from a practical point of view, it really, really, really helped. Not having to remain blind. You see, so individuation. Now people say, well, is that the same as enlightenment? No, it's not. That's the quick answer. Enlightenment, as per Indian sages like Ramana and Nisargadatta, the Eastern traditions in Buddhism would be different, slightly different. But individuation is probably as close to enlightenment as we're likely to get. Individuation is being the best that you can be without needing to think about it. So becoming your natural self. Does a tree need to know it's a tree to be a tree? Does a dog need to know it's a dog to be a dog? Do you see? The dog doesn't need to say all the time, oh, look at me, I'm a great big tall dog. Am I so pretty or so ugly or so hairy or any of these things? The dog just gets on with being a dog and does dog things. Now, an individuated person would be the same. They just get on being what they are without any distortions. You see, so they would just naturally be, no effort. Whereas the way we are is a lot different. We're all the time possibly wondering, worrying, am I good enough? Am I tall enough? Am I pretty enough? Oh God, that shame that I carry from my past. All of these, shadowy bits. My belief systems. I'm not good enough. Self-inflation, my arrogant self, my wounded self, all of these parts are stopping me from just being natural. So individuation, it's a path of individuation. It's not a moment of individuation. Like you hear about enlightened moments and somebody saying, well, the disappearance of the self. With enlightenment, no self. But with individuation, it's the ego that is becoming individuated. So it's self-knowledge, self-awareness. Do you see, it's happening, the path of individuation is happening inside of you. It's a cumulative process. So the Jungian map of the psyche. And this is, his work begins, when you start looking at the collective works, he has these huge big volumes, and they're called different titles, of course, but one of them would be the structure and dynamics of the psyche. And these big volumes, the complete works, they're broken down. In English, they're broken down into smaller books. So when you go into a bookstore that would sell stuff on this, quite possibly you'd see, books on the masculine, books on the father, books on the mother, books on the feminine. And you'd find that these are just individual chapters taken from the complete works. So, if you're buying books, if you're the type of person who wants to buy books and have them on the shelf, it's probably worthwhile buying the complete works if you want to put them on the shelf. Now, it's like buying Encyclopedia Britannica. There's no need for it. They'd only be reference. You're never going to sit down and read them. Tell you that for nothing, because they're just too scientifically written. Anyway, so out of the structures and dynamics of the psyche, Jung provides us with a map of the psyche. And he says at one end of the scale, there's you and me in the world. And this is our ego. What we think with. The mind that we're so familiar with, that we call me, is the ego mind. It's a construct. It's developing. It's growing. Just like my body grows, my ego grows. And it's necessary. If you didn't have any ego, you wouldn't know who you are. You wouldn't be able to cross the road. Do you know what I mean? It's the way that business gets done inside of you. It's how the mind works. It's really, really important to develop your ego, to have a stable self. One of the issues, if you like, in therapy is that when somebody comes in trauma, you might have to spend time working with them to develop their ego building, to give them some ground, the strength to stand up tall, strong, and steady. This all comes from a healthy ego. So when you start reading stuff about, ego is bad and ego is terrible and too much ego, it's all written from a place, context is everything. But those sort of comments are coming from an incomplete understanding. So just like you need a strong body, you also need a strong ego, but not too strong, not too defended. Do you see? And this is where self-awareness comes in. So the outside of the ego, pointing outwards into the world, you have the persona. So this would be like, the wardrobe with all your suits of clothes and jumpers and jackets. So you're going to be a different person no matter who you meet. You answer the door, you're collecting a parcel from the postman. You'll have one persona. You'll open the door. Thanks very much. Close the door. You'll meet that person in a certain way. And then if the doctor comes around to call on you, you'll meet the doctor in a different way. It'd be more official, more stiff, if you like, maybe. Authority. If a policeman calls, you'll have a different persona. Do you see? And the ego and the persona work together. But the ego is more the structure, and the persona is the face. The ego is like the skeleton, and the persona would be the face, your attitudes. And you also need a healthy persona, obviously. Otherwise, you can't wear one face to everybody. Otherwise things would fall apart very quickly. Does this make sense, the way I'm saying it? Okay. So what we're looking at, the ego and the persona, is really the conscious end of the machine. This is, if somebody says, what am I, Stuart? Well, I would say I'm an ego with a persona. And what you do business with is my voice and my attitudes, and that's all belonging to the persona. But my thoughts, my thinking, my feelings, and my emotions all belong to my ego. It's like one step down, one step in, peeling the onion. And then alongside the ego, you have the shadow. And with Jung, the shadow is everything, because it's close to us. Everything that, how can I say this one now? The simplest way of saying it would be, everything that I'm not is my shadow. So when I'm being brought up in a family, there's loads of things that end up going in the bag that are not allowed. You know, like my aggression, my wildness, my my deviousness. All of these things are not allowed. So they all belong to the shadow. They all exist inside of me as potential, and they would be termed a shadow, and a whole lot more. Now, once I leave the surface behind and I look inside, it's like looking down a well. You can't see the bottom, because there's really, when I leave my personal consciousness behind, I enter into collective consciousness. So this is a very, very deep well. The psyche extends inward infinitely. How big is the universe outwardly? Well, how big is the psyche inwardly? Okay, so there's levels and layers to the psyche. Okay, so shadow and ego side by side at the top. There's a relationship between the shadow and the ego. And as such, there's a relationship between the shadow and the world. There's a relationship between the shadow and the ego. It's like you're running the bath and you put in a bath bomb, and the bath bomb dissolves in the bath. Okay, shadow and ego combine. You see, there's no separation within mind. They combine. So sometimes what's organizing you is your ego, and sometimes what's organizing you is your shadow. Oh, I think I'll stop off at the shop and buy a cream bun. I think I'll go in, I'll buy an ice cream for myself. Do you see, all of these, there's a sense of me taking care of myself more than I'm taking care of somebody else. Do you see, I'll buy an ice cream for myself. My self-thinking, my self-thought. This would be all based in shadow. To see, so the shadow is influencing my thinking. Do you see this, going into a shop and going into a restaurant and you get your meal and the soup is not quite hot enough, and you become the awkward customer for the day. You send the soup back to get it reheated twice. Oh, you're so important. The soup has to be a certain temperature. I remember a friend of mine used to give out about the little designs on her cup of coffee. You get it, over here in Ireland, it's Paddy's Day, you get a shamrock put in the mug of coffee. If you're giving out about the design wasn't perfect. Just see, it was smudged. And it wasn't good enough. Why? Because she needed better. Her princess. To see how important she was. Like, give me the perfect cup of coffee. So that's shadow. See, that's organized. She's been organized by a non-met need. So in developmental psychology and Freudian stuff and all that sort of thing, you'd hear about, or what, these instinctual drives and all that. And then there's different areas, behavioral psychology and all different, in after behaviorism, what was his name? Carl Rogers and Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, the triangle. I'm sure you've seen it. And there's all the different levels on the triangle of needs. Basic needs. I need to survive. I come into the world and I need to survive. And the second basic need, I need to do well. I need to not just survive, I need to thrive. I want to do well in this world. I want to grow and become strong. Do you see? So straight away, I want the first sandwich. Do you see how it passes down the line? I'm still being organized. No, that's my chair. I want to survive. You see, you can't have my chair. I need that. And then depending on how big our unmet needs are, how heavy the shadow is, that can push us into road rage, concert rage, restaurant rage. It can push us into this shadow behavior. I don't have enough, so I'll rob from somebody else. So the shadow is a dynamic because it's all the time appearing and disappearing. People talk about the shadow as being a real thing. Well, it is a real thing, but it's a real dynamic. Its influence is becoming strong and its influence is becoming weak. And Jung said the shadow is 90% gold. So a lot of what's in the shadow is our unlived potential, our potential to be better, our potential to be more comfortable with ourselves. How many of you are entirely happy with your hair? A group of women, how many women in the camp today can say, I am 100% happy with my hair? It's very difficult, isn't it? I am 100% happy with my appearance. Just see, comparing yourself to somebody else or to a different image, this is all psychology. This is all living. You meet it every day. You don't realize it, but you're being organized by it. The shadow can come into your life in very subtle ways, or it could have you drinking your head off.
Yeah. Can I ask you something?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Did you say that the shadow is 90% cold?
Gold.
Okay.
Gold. Yeah.
Okay.
No,
So
90% gold. In other words, it is your undeveloped potential.
Okay.
So where you're living your doubt, your self-doubt, I am not good enough. Where you're living that belief system inside of you, your shadow is in its golden aspect would be your confidence. See, your ability to be fully confident in yourself, the ability to fully accept yourself is the potential of your shadow. Now, it's also the murderer. Do you see, it's also the rapist or the thief or the delinquent or the drug addict. It's also that. It contains everything that you're not living out of. So all of us are potential bank robbers. All of us are potential murderers. And all of us are potential saints and healers, good people. Do you see? And this shadow ego relationship, this blending of two streams of water, this constant organization in this moment, and in this moment, and in this moment, and in this moment, integrating the shadow is about developing awareness of how I'm organized in this moment, and in this moment, and in this moment. You see, how do I check in with my shadow? How do I check in with myself? Through self-awareness. Where's the self-awareness going to come from? It's a quality of mind. How do I discover this quality of mind? By using my mind. Studying the mind that studies. By observation. Noticing. You see, when I notice something, I'm using the muscle of my mind. I'm developing my mind. An exercise I used to do would, in group work, I might walk into a group and I say, okay, I want you all to have a look around the room and tell me what you see. And people say, well, we see windows, we see doors, we see the floor, there's the ceiling, I see the light switch, I see the bulbs, I see chairs and tables and people. And you get the obvious things, everybody would see something. And they say, okay, now I want you to take a couple of deep breaths, center yourselves, calm down, come into yourselves, and I want you to look around again and tell me what you see. And suddenly people would be saying, I see the crack in the wall. I see the dirt between those two floorboards. I see how the table is not straight. I notice that the pen is half empty, half full. Suddenly people would be telling you about the detail rather than the obvious things. You see, just by calming the mind down, just by bringing the mind to rest, the person's ability to notice increases. You see, and you'd see that in what's reported. People would be reporting on the detail. Do you see? So when we're trying to develop self-awareness, we need to work with the mind. And yet what we're developing self-awareness of is the mind that we're working with. We're studying the mind that studies. It's like looking in a mirror. Somebody says, look again. I'm going to see more. Now look again. I see even more. Look again. Now I start getting annoyed. Oh, now you're getting annoyed. Did you see that? Now I'm seeing the shadow. You see, I'm getting annoyed. Look again. I'll never fuck off. Do you see, more is coming out. I'm seeing more. My attitude. Do you see, I'm starting to see my own position. I'm starting to see me. Look again. Look again. Look again. What do you see? Who do you see? Look into your own eyes. What do you see? Do you see fullness? Do you see emptiness? See, this is all shadow, ego, shadow. Our wounds. Now, the shadow is enormous as a subject, as a dynamic. It's what we're looking at all of the time. As a path, it's the path that we're walking on all of the time for the next 25 years, 30 years. You want to be integrating your shadow and beyond, because there's always more. Today's bit of life is going to bring up more stuff for you. Do you see? So effectively your ego is working on your shadow, and your shadow is also influenced by what's underneath that. Okay, so going back to Jung's map of the psyche, you have the persona, you have the ego, you have the shadow alongside the ego or underneath the ego, pointing inwards, and then you'd have the personal unconscious. So the personal unconscious is made up of our experiences. Do you see your experience of father, your experience of mother, your experience of going down to the shops every day, your experience of crossing the road, nearly having a bus hit you, your experience of falling off your bike, falling out of a tree, getting bitten by a dog. All these memories are in your personal unconscious. You're not walking around with them in your mind every day. But if somebody says, well, tell me the worst thing that ever happened to you. What do you mean by the worst? Well, the scariest. Do you see, or the worst. Do you see, there's all these different places you can go to in your mind. So what you're exploring is your personal unconscious. It's like you're putting your hand into the sack and you're rummaging around and you're pulling something out of the sack. Now, everything you pull out of the bag, every experience that you remember is going to have an unconscious component. It's going to have feelings. It's going to have emotions attached to it. Every experience you've ever had has been an emotional experience. So it has a shadow component. So the shadow, as you work with it, you'll begin to realize the shadow is all about power. It affects you at the level of power. Do you want more? Do you want less? Push, pull. It's all the time happening. We'll come back to that later. Okay, guys, the personal unconscious. Jung says, jumping ahead, Jung says that we have two psychological systems inside of us. Everybody has two separate psychological systems. You have your personal unconscious, that system, persona, ego, shadow, memories, and you have a collective system, a collective psychological system. You're part of the human species. You're part of something bigger than you. You're part of group. You're part of a nation. You have a collective identity and you have a personal identity. So these operate slightly differently. Now, within the realm of the personal unconscious, our memories, our experiences, they're all grouped into what Jung calls complexes. So it's like you look at a map of Denmark and you have the road system, the road network. And then you come to a town or a city and all the roads flow into the city. And there's traffic going into the city and there's traffic coming out of the city. The city represents a center, a busy center. So these complexes represent busy centers. I develop complexes about everything. Some are bigger than others. So I have a complex, a parental complex. I have a mother complex. I have a father complex. Do you see, I've been doing business with father, with mother all my life. So there's a busyness. There's a lot of activity within these areas of my mind. These imagos, these images, these drawers are opened and closed every day. Something that's spoken about relates me back to my early years. Do you see, so in my mind, I'm always doing business with these parental complexes. So you could group the parental complexes, mother, father, you could group them and you could label it family dynamics. So what are family dynamics? They were how the family worked, basically, how your family worked. And that is your family dynamic. And it's affected by mother, father, self, and everybody else that was in the family. right down to the family dog. Do you see, it tells you where you stand, which chair you're to sit in, who gets the first helping, who gets the biggest helping, what your duty is, what your responsibility is, who you are to be. Do you see, so generally, let's say this very generally, because not always the case, little girls grow up to be mothers. And little boys grow up to be fathers. The concept of man and woman are sort of blurred. See, the concept of adult is not quite clear. I can tell you what father is and what mother is very clearly. Do you see? So little girl grows up to be mother, and then mother, settles into a relationship as mother, has family, kids, maybe not, and friends, and she mothers her friends, and she mothers her partner, and partner fathers the man in the relationship, or the person in that male corner of the relationship, acts as father over his partner. And hang on, there's no man-woman relationship. It's a mother-father relationship. It's a parental relationship. Do you see? So the potential for father-mother relationship, the potential to have a conscious relationship, is in the shadow. It's never been developed. The people have grown up to be mum and dad. Well, who's mum and dad? Well, mum and dad is based on the mum and dad that you experienced. So you're an extension of the past. As you grow up and you adapt the same things that were given to you, the same ways that were applied to you, the same behaviors that you're familiar with, what could be more natural? I do as was done. You see, it's the easy route, the unconscious route. So I end up being the same type of person as my parents, or the opposite. I'm anything but mother, or I'm anything but father, or I am mother, or I am father. So our identity is false. To see, the beginning, where we begin from in this journey, is falseness. We're not authentic. We're not honest. We're unconscious. To see, we're organized by our complexes. We're organized by our family dynamic. I'm not organized by myself, my true self. I'm organized by a system of beliefs, what was given to me, handed down. I'm organized by my shadow. Do you see how the filters get added in as we grow up? And each filter organizes me, puts me into a slightly different position, tells me what I can do, what I can't do. Just see how this is. I go to school. School picks up where family leaves off. And everything is organizing me to be a good citizen, somebody who fits in. Thank you very much. Where does myself go? Where does the real me go? Well, it goes into my shadow as unlived potential. See, so when we're integrating our shadow, we're individuating. As we integrate more and more of the shadow, we're becoming ourselves more and more. We're getting to choose. We're digging up gold. Guys, does this make sense? Yep. Okay. So these are the basic Jungian concepts. You got persona, which is the suit of clothes you wear every day, the smile on your face, your attitude. You got the ego, which represents your limits, how fragile you are, how strong you are. what you think of yourself, very much to do with self, small s. You got your shadow, which is completely combined with ego. People talk about ego and shadow as two different things. Ego and shadow are a dynamic together. They're a dancing couple. And what you are on top of that, out of that, is a result of the combination of ego and shadow. It's happening before this moment begins. You are organized before the moment begins. Do you see? So ego and shadow have already done their work together. Do you see the water, the bath bomb has dissolved into the bath water. How are you going to get it out? There's no way of getting it out. Get the salt out of the salt water. It's a very difficult job. You have to work it. Do you see? So bringing awareness to this dynamic, starting to look in underneath the ground of yourself, it's not an easy task. And it's a gradual revelation. You don't see, it's like, have a look, have another look, have another look, sit in front of the mirror, have another look. Now what do you see? Now what do you see? As you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you begin to see the detail within the detail. And the self-awareness that comes from getting to know yourself at a deep, deep level is this path of individuation. Because you stop being false and you start being real. Now, within the personal unconscious, you also have dynamics, psychological dynamics going on. You've got dynamics from the shadow, which is, looking outwards. It's quite close to the world. The world also has a shadow. Your family has a shadow. Everything has a shadow, but it's not what it claims to be more of, what it claims to be less of. Religions have shadows. Do you see? So you're organized by the ego shadow dynamic, but you're also organized by the deeper aspects of your psychology. And Jung talks about these as, he names them as the anima and the animus. Now, these would also be described as the counter gender. And these belong to the unconscious. It's not beginner's stuff. This is where it gets complicated when you start looking at anima and animus. But basically, inside every woman is a man, and inside every man is a woman. And as you get to know the man inside of you, that getting to know yourself is moving towards wholeness. You can't know your whole self if you only know half of yourself. Do you see? And inside every man is a woman. And as the man gets to know his own heart, he gets to know the woman. As he gets to know the woman inside of him, he gets to know his own heart, his feeling aspect, his feminine aspect. As a woman gets to know her own strength, her mind, her power, her own spirit, she gets to know the man inside of her. See, the animus, the male aspect of you, is very much the spirit in you. It's your mind. It's what you think with. It's the thinker. Not what you think with, it's the thinker. So bringing awareness to these deeper aspects of yourself, you begin to see, maybe, I've never lived my life as a woman. I've always lived the voice in my head. The voice in my head organizes me, perhaps. Or maybe you've lived your life as the woman without the support of the voice in your head. And the voice in your head has been the critical voice, the shadow voice. Do you see? So there's the getting to know your shadow, which can be quite surface. That's the beginning. Jung said that's the beginning work. The beginning work is the work of the shadow integration. And then the work of your life, the main event, is this integration of the animus, in the case of a woman, this deeper dynamic. So you can't, like digging the garden, you can't go down to the subsoil until you dig through the topsoil. So the way in is through the shadow. The way in is through your life problems. And then very quickly you begin to start seeing the process going on, the psychological process going on. You start telling me about problems at work. Oh, the boss is this, the boss is that. And that's a beginning point. And then from that point, we start to talk about, well, how does that relate inside of you? Oh, I hate being told what to do. So critical. You see, so now we're talking about your own stuff. Okay, we're into process. The process that goes on inside of you. When we were talking about work stuff, we're talking more about the content of your life. See, day-to-day stuff would be content. What happened Monday? What happens Tuesday? That's all content. It fills the space. How do you feel about it? Now we're talking about process. Guys, does it sort of give you something to work with? Are you gaining some sort of images in your mind about how it all goes together? It's like levels and layers. But the Jungian map is quite simple in the sense that it just has persona, ego, shadow, countergender, the personal unconscious. That's it in terms of you. And then it talks about the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious is like the ocean you swim in. And it's very, very similar to the personal unconscious, just vastly bigger. Because it includes all of people's experiences everywhere at all time. The 2 million year old man. Do you see? It includes your mythology, your nationality, your national history. Everything that's ever happened is in the collective unconscious. And just as we have complexes, personal unconscious, we have these areas of busy mental activity which heat up. In the collective psyche, they're called archetypes. They're just bigger complexes. Instead of looking at a small town of 100 houses, you got Copenhagen. Do you know? And as such, the archetypal core has enormous power. Whereas the local town is only using, a small amount of power, small amount of energy. So our personal psyche in relation to the collective psyche, it's like a flea on the back of an elephant. Do you see? There's an order of scale comes into it. So somebody can be taken over by their shadow, and that would represent a difficult time of their life. But if they're taken over by an archetype, that would represent a catastrophe. Somebody can be neurotic. We're all neurotic, possessed by our complexes. We're all neurotic. But if somebody is psychotic, that's a different level of hurt. Do you understand? You're dealing with a different thing entirely. Loss of the self. If somebody falls into collective unconsciousness, now I'm Napoleon. Do you know, I'm Santa Claus. I've lost my identity. Whereas in the personal unconscious, I can be a grumpy old man I can be a happy soul. I still have my identity. It's emotional. The disturbance in me at a personal level is always going to be emotional. Do you see? So shadow behavior, these power dynamics that happen from shadow behavior, very much organized through emotion. Whereas loss of self-identity, if you have a fragile ego, it's like skating on thin ice. If you go down through that ice, you might never be found again. Do you see? So there's a huge difference between the personal consciousness and the collective consciousness within us. That is emphasized more and more and more as you begin to understand Jung, because you start to see how we are individually organized by our family dynamic, and yet within our family dynamic, it places us on the spectrum of the collective dynamic. So I'll give you an example. If my needs are not met within my family, if my mother or father occupy the center and it's all about their needs, then the children's needs are put second. And I grow up either being a victim or a martyr. That's my position in life. I'll be a people pleaser, or I'll be an abuser. See, based on what happened at home. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. That complex in me, that identity within me of being organized as a people pleaser or an abuser, that sits on top of the collective psyche within me, and it dials into it. So then I get organized by something that's so much more powerful than me. So the abuser in me gets fixated on images that come from the collective psyche. And I could be organized by Jack the Ripper. Do you see? The evil in me is the evil that comes from the collective in me. So Jung says that every complex has a core, and the core in it is archetypal. Or the good person in me, the people pleaser in me, gets organized by the Messiah complex, by I get taken over by a self-inflation, and I think I'm Jesus. Do you see? And I start to live that life, not Jack the Ripper. I go the other direction. But either way, it's a loss of personal identity. Now, the archetype, this is important stuff, because the archetypal core that exists at the center of a complex holds us in place. It's like a strong magnet. It holds us in place, and it stops us from developing the relationship with ourselves. Guys, is this too deep? Are you still 1 foot in the camp? Or are you hanging out the window looking for air? Just let's have a check-in, just see where people are at. Just let me hear your voice. See how you guys are doing with this. Any questions? What have I spoken about so far? And don't be shy. What have I spoken about so far? What bit? Collectively, we can all get it. Okay, so as a group, let's start filling in the gaps. What have I spoken about so far? What have I mentioned? Go on, mic's on. Take a chance. Jump in. Just give me a word that has stuck with you.
I can say something.
Excellent. Go on. Go for it.
And it's because my English is very bad. So, but again, that's my shadow who's
You're doing
talking
great.
to me right now.
You're doing fantastic. Not a word out of place.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So, shadows.
Shadow. That's it.
And I'm
Yeah.
struggling with it right now.
Yeah. You see,
Yeah, I'm aware of it.
It's emotional.
Yeah.
Psychologically, it's affecting you at an emotional level.
Yes.
So Freud talks about all this stuff about our emotional energy changing realms, how it moves in and out of the body, it moves in and out of the mind. And we are this organism that exists through these different realms, these different levels. At the top, we have our cognition. To see at the very top. And then below that, we're emotional. And underneath that, we're physical.
Yeah.
And these three levels are constantly interacting. There's a relationship between these three levels. And behind those three levels, we are psychological. So cognition and psychology are different, not the subject of psychology. Our psychological self is our psyche. It's deeper. Do you see, its access into the world could be emotional, or it could be physical, or it could be through our cognition.
Yeah.
But deeper down, we are psychological beings. So the dynamics that organize us from the surface, shadow dynamics, very much emotional, are mental images. What we've gathered from, I was a dot. From the very beginning of my life, from the moment of conception, not the moment of birth, from the perinatal states prior to conception, prior to birth, from the moment of conception, we have been building a dynamic. A dynamic has been organizing us. Karma, if you want. Do you see how it works? Everything comes from within. Before I existed, I was a zygote. I was this little two-celled, blob. And yet there was life in that. Do you see? And then suddenly I was 4 cells. And there's life in that. And each cell has to correspond with each other cell. There's this togetherness going on from the very, very beginning, this relationship that we are. I don't have a relationship. I am a relationship. Do you see? What type of relationship am I? Do you see how is my perinatal states, the first trimester, the second trimester, the third trimester, the fourth trimester, after I'm born, before my ego develops? When did my ego develop? Well, probably about 3, 4, 5, 6 months old. What was going on before then? Well, your brain wasn't myelated. You were still growing. You weren't thinking as a center, as an egoic center. Life was present, but you were not. Do you see? So our psychological self is a dynamic. Psychodynamics. Guys, what else have you heard? You heard about shadow. What else have I spoken about? What other words have I used?
Near me, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting, so I'm just listening. But especially the one part about how we need a strong ego and how it can be really dangerous, or if we don't have an ego, like if you have to build up the ego.
That's a big one, yeah. Absolutely. You wouldn't go to fetch water with a paper bag. You know what would happen? You'd end up with wet feet. Okay, so the mind needs to be contained. Your emotions need a container. Your life needs a container. That container is the egoic structure, your character. Another word, your character structure. In body-centered psychotherapy, we would talk about character structures. You see, Jung talks about ego. Just same thing, just different words. So that you have your personality and you have your character structure. Your personality is quite shallow compared with your character structure. Where does your character structure come from? Where did your personality come from? Do you see, this is the ego shadow dynamic. So, what else have I got on my list? Yeah, okay, so words, we're going to go a bit further. So words you're going to come across. These certain terms you're going to come across. So obviously, persona, ego, shadow. Countergender later on, anima, animus. Animus in the case of a woman, anima in the case of a man. Don't worry too much about them at the moment. Read up on them, familiarize yourself. But they're there in the background, and they add a great deal to the picture. The collective unconscious, the way it's organized is through archetypes. The way we are organized is through complexes. So the ego is also a complex. The ego, your identity, is a working complex. It's just the biggest complex. Do you see? It's a very useful complex. So complexes are not bad. They're necessary. In order to identify where you stand, you need to have this psychological busyness to help you to identify what is. Do you see?
Can I ask something about that?
Of course you can.
Is the ego the only complex that is conscience? Like, yeah.
That's a great question, in fact, because what Jung says is Jung says that within the collective unconscious, there are autonomous, how does he structure it? How does he word it? There are autonomous being, there are archetypal figures, life exists within us, as well as life exists as us. And sometimes these points of life, this aliveness within us, it sometimes it's not us. It has its own autonomy. So when aliveness flows through into our psyche, it flows into these complexes through the archetypes, into the complexes, and we can be taken over by our complexes, our shadow. We can be taken over. So our self complex can be temporarily disabled. And we become possessed by our shadow complex, an aspect of our shadow. Example being, standing in court the next day, Your Honor, I don't know what came over me. I acted completely out of character. Do you see? I don't rob banks. I don't machine gun crowds. And yet there I was yesterday, caught with a machine gun in my hand. Do you see? I don't know what came over me. What came over me was shadow. I became possessed by this other operating system. So was that a different person in me? Yeah, you could well describe it as that, a different person. Who was it like? Well, it was like my drunk father or my angry mother. Or it was like Jack the Ripper or Genghis Khan. Do you see? Or Napoleon or somebody else. This system, people talk about entities, and in a way they're half right and they're also half wrong. When people talk about entities, what they're talking about is a strong influence, a strongly organized influence. And yes, that could be an autonomous entity within our psyche, but more often than not, it's an impulse that comes from our shadow. You see, more often than not, when we act out, it'll be an impulse that we can't resist. Hope that makes sense. So, anybody, interrupt me as I go along. Don't feel bad about throwing in questions. Questions are great. This collective unconscious in us, it is organized as archetypes. Archetypes can be read about if you study mythology. So when we study mythology, like the Greek mythology, for example, but any form of mythology, when we study mythology, we're reading about the gods and goddesses, like Zeus up in Mount Olympus, all these Hades down in the deeps, and Hermes, and all the Greek gods and goddesses, Demeter, the homemaker, Aphrodite, the young, beautiful, seductive maiden, you know, all of these, Athena, the warrioress, jumping out of Zeus's head, you know, and then retreating later on into the forest. I think that was Athena. Anyway, you're reading about the character of the collective unconscious. These gods and goddesses represent types of human beings. And as such, they have a positive and negative aspect. So everything in us, from the collective unconscious all the way through into the personal conscious, is organized as dualistic consciousness. It has a positive and a negative aspect. It is masculine and feminine. It stands opposite itself. It is dualistic in nature. It stands opposite itself. So I, as a man, stand opposite you as a woman. But I also stand opposite to myself, the woman inside me. So as I create a relationship with you as a woman on the outside, I am organized in that relationship by the relationship with the woman inside of me. Do you see how this inside-outside thing goes on all the time? You think you're making your mind up before you know, this is my decision. I'm arriving at this decision, and you have no idea that you've been organized into making that decision. You think you have free choice. Do you? Do you all think you have free choice? How free are you really when it comes down to it? Can you go against yourself? For how long? And what is that self that you go against? If you ignore your own gut feeling on something and you go against your better judgment, who is it in you that you're going against? Do you see the depth, the levels and layers that you start meeting inside yourself when you start asking that question? So this is where shadow, everything that I'm not is in my shadow. So maybe my shadow represents my wisdom when I'm making a mistake. And when I'm acting from my wisdom, maybe my shadow represents my stupidity, my idiot, my inner idiot, which is quite large. Do you see how it works? Dualistic. I stand opposite myself. And the collective unconscious is exactly the same. The archetypes in us have a positive and a negative aspect. Okay. So I was saying to you earlier on, because undoubtedly you remember everything I said, was that each complex has a core. So you develop a pimple on your arm, and that pimple starts to develop a yellow head. It has a core. If you don't take care of it, it might become a boil, and it becomes septic. And the center of it now is toxic. It's poisonous. And if you ignore that, maybe that poison goes into your system and you get gangrene or something worse. I don't know if there's anything worse. Do you see, you get septicemia and you start poisoning yourself. So this dualistic nature in the archetype, if your personal alignment is towards positive, well, then you will connect in the positive aspect of the archetype. If your personal alignment is negative, then you will be organized by the negative aspect of the archetype. Which is worse? Do you see? One guy goes out as Jack the Ripper, and the other guy goes out as Jesus Christ. Which is worse? Do you see, the guy who goes out into the world and is love bombing everybody, telling everybody what a great person they are, smiling at you, looking into your eyes, telling you how wonderful you are, that person has a dark shadow. They stand opposite themselves. And the darkness in their shadow, because it's not conscious in them, it's connecting with the darkness in the archetype, and it can become heavier. So the well-respected priest ends up being the pedophile. See, you hear about the respectable politician who's robbing the country blind. Do you see, the shadow aspect is split off. And when it's split off, it gains power from the archetype, that center of it itself, and it becomes autonomous. When something, if I say to you, I want you to chop your hand off, you are now disconnected from your hand. You have no authority over your hand. You are separated from it. If you ignore your shadow, you might as well say that you have chopped your shadow off and you are separated from your shadow. Do you see? And as such, your shadow is now free to do whatever it wishes to do. So the phrase, keep the dog on the lead. Don't let the dog off the lead. If you let the dog off the lead, the dog is likely to run away. You keep your shadow on a lead. You don't let it off the lead. You ask yourself, what is my shadow doing? What does my shadow want to do? Where is my shadow? Maybe when I'm walking down the street as a well-respectable person coming from a good family, maybe my shadow is in the homeless person that I step around who has a wine bottle in his pocket. Do you see, maybe he's living my shadow. The shadow of society. You have the well-respectable end of society, and you have the people who live under the floorboards of society. Do you see these opposites? So Jung talks about uniting the opposites. He says the path of individuation is about integrating the shadow. Well, the shadow is an opposite to the ego. How do we do that? By recognizing the guy on the pavement. By recognizing our potential. When I walk past that guy in the pavement, what am I doing? Giving him the finger, saying, fuck you. Do you see this? It happens in every moment. It's in my thinking. It's in my character structure. It's in my ego. So studying the mind that studies is about bringing this stuff to the surface and recognizing it. This psychological journey is a journey into yourself. I don't know what happened there. Somebody disappeared, did they? Jumped. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so somebody's battery ran out. So another term you're going to come across is ego self-axis. The ego self-axis. And what we mean by this is that there's a relationship between my ego on the surface and the self deep within, the archetype of the self, capital S. There's a relationship between me and that mysterious source of aliveness inside of me. There's a relationship between me and the God inside of me. The ego self. The self. Jung says it's the central organizing archetype. So it's like the sun. You look up into the sky, the sun is the central organizing archetype of the solar system. Everything revolves around the sun. The sun brings life to all of the planets in the solar system, even though we don't recognize that life. Okay, the central organizing archetype, the self, capital S, central organizing archetype. You could equally substitute the word God. Nature wouldn't be far off it. Nature is not quite, nature stands at the edge of the personal realm and the archetypal realm. So nature, in some respects, is an archetypal figure. And in other respects, it's part of creation. So nature is the sort of unusual one. But you could substitute God, goddess, mystical, the beloved, whatever word you want for the self, if you prefer. And the ego self-axis is the relationship between the ego and the self. So as you develop it, you open up this ego self-axis. As you develop the relationship of knowing with yourself, you open up this pathway. And the qualities of the self begin to emerge inside you. How can I, let's see. In Buddhism, they talk about enlightenment, and they say there's no such thing as enlightenment, but there are enlightened qualities. So as you practice Buddhism, what you're developing is enlightened qualities, the qualities of the four immeasurables: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, stability of mind. So within those 4 immeasurables, they are the qualities of enlightenment. Do you see? There's no end to them. There's no end to how bright the sunshine can get. The shine of the sun can become stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Do you see the strength of the self? It has the ability to shine through you. Okay, so ego self axis. As you open up this axis, as you develop the relationship, you develop these enlightened qualities, the qualities of the self. You naturally become more loving, more compassionate, love, compassion, joy, more joyful, and more stout-hearted, more stable within yourself. So that's the ego self axis. And the last thing on my agenda for this part is the dynamic way that all of this happens. We, in our logical mind, want to pin it all down. I want to read the book and say, now I know it. Do you see? I want to paint the picture, and now the picture is painted. I've done that one. Do you see? Well, do it again. It'll be slightly different. It's dynamic. The whole thing is dynamic. It's constantly changing. You as an organism are constantly, you're in flux with everything in the universe. Do you see? If a frog jumps over here, it's going to affect you in some way. This quantum field, this superposition, how one electron affects another electron, far side of the universe. We're all interconnected. So this dynamic nature, it can't be pinned down. So the more you know, the less you know. The more you know introduces you to the less that you know. So guys, that's it. We're gonna take a break. Hella said 8 o'clock, I think. So